Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Wolfpack Wellness Research web series. I'm your host, Dr. Susie Goodell. This series is a collaboration between the University Wellness Advisory Committee, the NC State Libraries, and NC State Well Rec, where our aim is to discuss the wellness research happenings across NC State's campus. And for those of you joining us live via Zoom, you can submit your questions. I'm pointing here because that's where my chat box is, but you can submit your questions to our speaker in the chat box function, and we will have a Q&A time at the end of the show. So today's guest is Ms. Sherry Granillo. Did I say that right?
Granillo,
thank you. And I even discussed this earlier. I'm really bad, sorry. So Sherry's responsible for developing and disseminating programs related to research affecting wellness and health at the Plants for Human Health Institute in Kannapolis, North Carolina. Her particular interests include prevention and disease mitigation through diet change and maintenance. And she has experience as a primary care medical provider in underserved communities. So I'd like to thank you for joining us today, Sherry.
Thanks for having me.
So why don't you tell us, because you were pretty open about, I don't do research, yet you use research a lot in what you do. So why don't you tell us first a little bit about what you do, and then we can focus in on the fruit and vegetable RX or fruit and vegetable prescription program.
Okay, sure. So just kind of like you said earlier, I'm a nurse practitioner by training, and up till a few years ago, I was 100% a primary care provider in a small town in New Mexico, just providing primary care for, day-to-day patients. But my job here at NC State at the Plants for Human Health Institute in Kannapolis is to bring some of the research that's going on with the PIs and put that together in a form that can be used by primary care providers with their patients.
So why don't you tell us a little bit more about the fruit and vegetable? I keep saying RX. Do you call it RX or prescription?
Well, we call the program Phyto RX. Actually,
okay.
It's a way. So the way that I like to look at it is going to providers with more information about lifestyle modification, including changes in diet and exercise. So we've heard a lot about, and maybe you guys have heard a lot about, but it's kind of a hot topic now, fruit and vegetable prescription programs. Mm-hmm. There's becoming more and more like grants available for people to do something like that in community programming. If anybody heard Dr. Haynes Maslow talk on these the wellness talks, the last time I think you had one, maybe she was talking about a fruit and vegetable prescription program that she was involved in. But there's multiple ones, even sponsored by some. Like Medicaid is starting to do something, and Blue Cross Blue Shield is starting to do one. And it's focused on giving either stipends or baskets of fruits and vegetables to people who are the most underserved to try to boost their fruit and vegetable consumption. And the way that I'm taking the research and going in kind of a different angle is that I really feel like there's a lack of knowledge on the provider level about from providers to patients, getting this information to patients in that way. And I really feel like it can affect all patients that go to providers, not just the most underserved, which of course is very important, but I feel like everyone could benefit from some of this knowledge.
So you said phyto earlier, you used the term phyto. Can you tell us a little bit more about what that means?
Sure. So one of the main things that the Plants for Human Health Institute is looking at is phytochemicals. So these are chemicals that are in plants that provide some function to the plant, but can also provide a function in the health of humans. So we're looking at anthocyanins that are in blackberries, blueberries, black beans, stuff like that, the red and purple pigments in plants, or maybe carotenoids, which are orange and yellow pigments in plants that have certain specific functions in the body. and how can providers look at the disease profile of a patient and pick out specifically where they can guide their patients to eat more of specific foods.
Awesome. So can you give us an example? So let's say that I'm a provider and I have a patient who has a certain chronic disease. Can you talk us through, one, how you would train me as a provider, but then also how I would work with my patient?
Sure. So historically, providers, whether it's nursing, whether it's PAs, which are physician assistants, whether it's MDs or DOs, they typically have a very small amount of nutrition training while they're in school, while they're in professional school. So they're much more, especially if it's a westernized sort of focus. There is a lifestyle medicine, a new certification that you can get, which focuses a little bit more. But traditionally, most of the medical providers that you go to will be trained with very little nutrition knowledge. Mm-hmm. So you'll go into a provider and you'll have diabetes, for example, and they'll say, okay, you need to improve your diet and exercise, but let me go ahead and write you this prescription for this medication that I know will help treat your condition. And it's either up to the patient to figure out what diet and exercise means, or, perhaps they were sent to a dietitian and they do great work and they can certainly help patients. But not every patient has the ability to go to one of these registered dietitians, or their insurance doesn't cover it, or there isn't one available to them. So what I propose is to either pre-graduation or post-graduation, get some of that extra knowledge to providers, whether it's through CME credits or a class before they graduate, so that they know what some of the evidence-based practice should be regarding that. So, Mediterranean diet and the focus on some of these phytochemicals. And then once they have that toolkit, they can go in one-on-one with a patient and they can say, I have actually a picture of one. I don't know if you can see it. Is have a prescription, something like this, and mark what their diagnosis is and say, because you have diabetes, I want you to really focus on a Mediterranean diet. We're going to change some of your proteins to more plant-based proteins, but most specifically, I want you to focus on anthocyanins in your diet. So, Mediterranean style diet, but I want you to add some blueberries with your oatmeal in the morning. I want you to change from pinto beans to black beans to get a little bit more of that phytochemical in your diet to help treat your diabetes.
So thank you for sharing that. That was very helpful for me, at least, to understand more. So can you tell me the kind of training you said that you wanted either during their education before they graduate, or even post-graduation during these continuing education modules? Can you tell me how you create those? Because I feel like that's really your element, right?
Right. So using different, for example, there's an NC State program in Extension called Med Instead of Meds. Mm-hmm. And that's a really great program to introduce the different elements of the Mediterranean diet. And it can really be focused on medical providers, and something that medical providers or extension agents or nurses or other people in the community can get to patients. And then having this program, and I'm putting a program together that can be used sort of asynchronously, as we've all had to get used to stuff with COVID, which makes it a little more portable to longer distances, that can be used to help get some of this information into the hands of providers.
So have you launched this program yet, or are there other programs? Because you said you're working on making it asynchronous, but have you launched this either as an in-person program or online synchronously?
So we started one, and we've done sort of a mini pilot, and it started right before COVID, so it got changed a lot and sort of crunched up a lot with COVID. But working with connecting this program with a free clinic in Mooresville, North Carolina, along with cooperative extension in that county, and a food bank where people could fill their prescriptions. So it was in part getting the information to the providers at the free clinic, but also making it available so so patients weren't, I guess, out extra. The patients weren't having to do a lot extra in order to get this food. So it was making those connections as part of the program to get everything to work right.
So I heard you say this was a pilot, and certainly with all of the stuff going on with COVID, major shifts. Can you tell me though what you learned from the first part of the implementation, or even once you had to like shift immediately to COVID protocols?
Right. So the cooperative extension agent that was working with me was planning on doing some in-person, face-to-face with patients, and that got abbreviated and got moved to videos, which we feel like didn't work as well as in person with tastings and making food would have. And I feel like, especially as a provider as well, having more follow-ups with providers to make sure everything was running smoothly. I mean, there was a lot going on with COVID and extra people needing extra food anyway. And so the numbers at this particular food bank increased. So they had a lot of weird traffic and that kind of stuff too. So if we discount that and we look more at what went well, but not exactly right, getting providers more on board with regular follow-up, because I think that is a shortcoming of it, is that, like I said, a lot of these providers didn't have any of that education while they were in school. So they're kind of unsure that something like this would work. I mean, it doesn't work quickly. It certainly doesn't work as quickly as a medication that you can, have somebody go pick up right now and their blood sugar will drop by the end of the week. It's something over time that works together, is a supplement to what's going on in the clinic.
Yeah. And so you just shared one of the challenges of like the providers just don't necessarily know what's going on with that, or getting them to do more follow-up care. I'm curious, what are some of the other challenges that you've either seen already or that you anticipate as you go on in implementing this program?
There are several, actually. One is people don't want to change their diet, or maybe they want to change their diet, but their habits are so ingrained from childhood that they're unwilling to change their way of eating, the recipes that their mom made, their comfort foods. Two is with providers not wanting to change the way they do things. It's a habit for a provider to prescribe a medication. They get the lab work and they look at it and they see what the patient's doing, and they put together their plan as they always have. And this, takes a little bit more time and a little bit more one-on-one education. Another barrier is fruits and vegetables are expensive. They can be more expensive. And prices have gone up recently. So looking for different ways of getting groceries. I think all of us could probably say we go to the same grocery store and we can get in, if we know what we want, we can get in and out of there in 20 or 30 minutes, because we know where to go and what to look at. And if we're given a list of things, well, I've never bought blueberries, where do I even go for that? And how does that change, the way my budget at the grocery store? How does it change? Or if you want me to go to a different grocery store or to this food bank to get food, I don't usually go there. And how does that change, my transportation or my menus at home, any of those things? So there's several challenges.
Yeah, and in my line of work, we've seen the same kind of thing. So for those who don't know, I'm a registered dietitian. So a lot of what Sherry was talking about, I get it for sure. And we've had things where we see people saying things like, I don't even know how to make this, right? Or you're going and picking out blueberries. How do I know that this is good and it's not going to go bad? How do I store it? All that stuff. So certainly I can understand those challenges. So when it comes to the providers, you were talking about that, their training is training in Western medicine, where we typically are write a prescription for a medication and done is done until you come back 3 to 6 months later to check and see how your values have changed. And you said we want the providers to think more about follow-up care related to this. Can you talk a little bit? Is there going to be more heavy lifting, more meetings, things like that related to this? Or is it something different that might challenge the providers to implement this into their programs?
When you say more meetings?
So like, for example, are they going to need to see their patients more frequently? So patient visits, I'm sorry.
So I think it would depend on the culture of the practice. So some practices may have more nurses that are available to do some of these follow-up programs, or they may have community health workers. Some practices may have longer visits available for primary care providers. So I think it would sort of be a mix, and it would have to, each individual practice would have to take this information and sort of digest it and see how it would work in their practice. But I definitely think it's going to mean more follow-up to begin with, but hopefully less follow-up down the road, because people are doing better once they get the habit of eating in a different way.
So, you also said that, let's take diabetes, for example. We're going to give you this prescription and your blood sugars are going to be much more manageable. And, I can talk about all the values of A1Cs and things like that are going to go down. And that's great. And then we have this program that you said it's going to take longer. So are the providers supposed to not give prescriptions? Are they supposed to start this program earlier? Can you talk a little bit about how this might go into, because you also said preventative care, not just treatment?
Right. So taking into account if there's a family history, if there's a precondition going on, a precancerous lesion on the skin, or a prediabetes, or those things, this specific PhytoRx can be instituted in these patients. However, I'm hoping that, if this, even just the Mediterranean diet, a little bit more information about Mediterranean diet for providers, they can start talking about in general, you should be eating more like this Mediterranean diet and you will have fewer complications, for everyone, every single patient that comes in. What does your diet look like? You seem to be doing well today. What are you eating? Okay, let's optimize your health, and instead of just treating what ails you. So I think there needs to be a move in that direction. And I feel like it is the job of every medical provider to pass on a little bit of that knowledge. I always tell the story of my dad, who has diabetes and went to a medical provider, and they said, okay, first thing, diet and exercise, great, go do it. And then here's some other things. And, taking the medication is just so easy, but he was so confused. Okay, great, diet and exercise. I heard you say those words, but I have a diet and here it is. And, I'm eating, and, oh, you want me to drink more water? Okay, I can drink more water, or you want me to eat more fruits and vegetables? Okay, I ate an apple. Great. I ate more than I was eating. But what does it really mean? What does it mean to eat a Mediterranean diet? What does it mean to change your diet to a DASH diet? What does it really mean? And educating your patients more specifically, probably not to the level that a registered dietitian can do. If you can send them to a nutritionist or somebody who can spend the entire hour talking just about food, but on a basic level that every single patient can get some benefit from.
Yeah, and certainly most people, like you said, aren't going to be going to a registered dietitian because of funding or time or lots of different access issues. So you said Mediterranean diet a lot in this presentation, and I just heard you say DASH diet as well. But can you give the audience a little bit of what you're meaning by Mediterranean diet? Because some people may not be familiar with that.
Right. So just hearing it, Mediterranean diet sounds like a bunch of hummus, maybe a little pizza on the side. But Mediterranean diet is really about changing a few things. So you want to change your proteins from more animal-based protein to more plant-based protein. So legumes and so beans and lentils and stuff like that, as in nuts and seeds as your proteins, really increasing your fruits and vegetables, and decreasing salts, decreasing sugar, especially in sweetened beverages, and then snacking on higher protein like nuts and seeds sort of foods instead of cookies or crackers. We're shifting from, a low fat diet to a higher healthy fat diet with avocados and olive oil, without having a whole bunch of fried chicken and heavy red meat and things like that.
But I like my steak and fried chicken, right? So can I have that?
Well, the Mediterranean diet is really trying to tone down and change some of that, but I really feel like it's important too to keep the culture of the patient, of every single patient, at the top part of the provider's mind when going over some of these things. So saying you absolutely have to become a vegan and you have to eat these particular foods is really going to scare a lot of people off, and it's not going to improve anyone's health. So making a plan where they can still get some of these foods that they really like or that they've historically eaten in their family, but making some tweaks in their diet so that it does become healthier and more aligned with the Mediterranean style of eating.
Yeah, thank you for that. I have one more question before we get into the Q&A with our audience, but I've heard you talk a lot about different partnerships, and I'd love to hear if there are any partnerships that you would like to speak to, and how you've been able to be successful, because I know you're not doing all this by yourself.
Right. So for sure, there's some nonprofits that are trying to do some really great things with their patients, like the free clinic in Mooresville called Health Reach is the one we've been working with. And then Feed NC is actually an interesting model for a food bank. It isn't just a food bank, but they're trying to align their goals with a more healthy based diet program as well. So they're not just giving out sheet cakes and white bread, but they're trying to put together things that more fresh fruits and vegetables for people. Another partnership that I'm working on is one with a student group that works in Asheville of medical students, social work students, nursing students, and pharmacy students, and trying to get them some of this information to see, and they'll be working with clients as well as part of an sort of a extracurricular activity, to see if it makes a difference in how they are able to interact with clients. So I'm really hoping to get this out to a lot of extension agents, because I feel like they have a lot of community contacts and medical providers in different types of communities, whether it's underserved or whether it's with lifestyle medicine, to really just see where the health in these communities can go.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think that can make a big difference in people's lives. So for the people who are joining us live, I would love for you to type in the chat box any questions you may have, and that way we can address them. Hopefully we've got a few people who have been holding something in, but as they're typing away, I would love to see more. I mean, I think you kind of talked about this a little bit, but where are you headed next with all of this? What besides the asynchronous piece, what's like burning, I want to do this next?
I'd just like to see people use this as sort of a first line treatment. So I'd like to see, I'm going to be doing some talks at some group talks for some different provider groups to see if we can't get them to use this as a first line treatment, to get this top on their mind.
Yeah. Training is really important. So y'all, I don't see any questions in the chat box. So hopefully someone will type soon, but if not, I do want to tell you, thank you so much for being with us today. Really appreciate it. And I promise it's not because they weren't listening. Sometimes they're a little shy. Oh, look, Jackie has something. She said it was great to hear about the partnership with Cooperative Extension in Mooresville. Was the plan to offer med instead of med classes with the participants at the food pantry?
So yes, that was part of it. That was med instead of med style classes with the cooking classes was going to be done by the extension agent, because they're sort of experts at delivering that message.
Yeah. Any other questions? Oh, Jane, can you share with us how to best communicate with those who need encouragement to make dietary changes?
So I think the key is habit change, which is a whole separate, body of knowledge about habits and habit change, but making small changes and seeing what the trigger is for someone to eat a certain thing and trying to use that trigger to change what the habit is. So if they typically grab a Twinkie after work every day, as soon as they come in and take their coat off, then maybe we can change that to grabbing an apple, or prepping some meals to go for lunch if they usually hit McDonald's. How can we change that habit so that some of these principles can be added into their life?
Awesome. So I have another one that y'all can't see, but it says, how can non-professional or non-educators help get the word out about get the word out about this program? So is there some way that people who aren't nutritionists or cooperative extension agents can help contribute to spreading the message here?
Sure. A really great way to get involved with something like this is to find a group of people who's interested in learning. And then, like through a church, for example, those are really great. I mean, some groups at churches are already meeting together. If they want to have a class like this lined up, they can go to Cooperative Extension in their county and request that a class be taught similar to this. There's also an online there's a website for med instead of meds, which is interesting. Or just try to get some of this just out into different groups. They can approach lots of people volunteer at food banks, and trying to get projects like this, programs into a food bank can also be an interesting way to help people.
Yeah, thank you. So Cindy says, how large a factor is the more general time pressures on primary care providers? It may be difficult to address this topic quickly with patients. And so we know that care providers have a very short window. I think I read somewhere it's like 8 minutes per person at most. So that's a lot to cover in 8 minutes.
Right. So that's why it's going to be the culture of the clinic, like I was talking before, has to be taken into consideration. So are we looking at an introduction from the provider recognizing, oh, listen, I want you to hear these words coming out of my mouth, and I want you to do these things, but I'm going to have the nurse come in and explain how this is going to work. And then I'm going to write you this prescription and you're going to take it. The nurse is going to explain, or the medical assistant is going to explain what to do next. So is there a link to a food bank, or is there a link to a particular farmer's market or something like that to pick up, where we know that you can find some of these foods?
Yeah, so it's really not just about the physician providing that information, but it's the whole practice communicating together to reach out to those patients. And I have another one from Jane. In some of the work we do in SNAP Ed, it is hard to keep people engaged for, sorry, it moved, a program that lasts 8 weeks. Any suggestions for incentives beyond the decreased blood pressure or A1C levels and just feeling better? So what kind of incentive would people have to continue a program like this?
So in the, I didn't mention this before, but we got a small grant in order to do the PhytoRx with the health clinic in Iredell County. And we were able to do sort of little swag items that had to do with cooking. So meal prep boxes or measuring spoons, measuring cups, cutting boards, anything like that, that people can know that they're going to be getting tools in order to make some of these things at home. And perhaps you have a grocery store gift card at the end, if you're able to get grant funding or something like that. But other things that are happening in the state are some counties have matching programs for EBT cards. So if you buy fruits and vegetables, you get twice as much as if you were to buy pasta or, something like that. And as I'm not sure if I mentioned this, there's 3 different things happening in the state right now called medically tailored meals that Medicaid is actually paying for. And it's foods of people coming out of the hospital, and Medicaid is paying for these medically tailored meals. So if you have diabetes, you get one kind of meal. If you have HIV, you get a different kind of meal. And seeing how well that works. Hopefully, as these improve the health of patients with Medicaid, it will expand to people who have insurance. It'll get more of it will get paid for, and we'll have more money in order to have some of these incentives to do things.
Yeah, thank you. And I think I have one more question. Are you developing resources, perhaps a newsletter, to provide to either providers or patients?
Actually, we are. So if you are interested, I don't know if you have my email posted anywhere.
We have a link on the website to your webpage from Kannapolis, so
Okay.
they should be able to find it there.
Okay, so for sure, if you were interested in that newsletter, it should come out in the next couple of months, and we're gonna work on lots of different tips and ways to provide this kind of information to different populations of people.
Thanks, Sherry. Well, y'all, it is past the normal time. Lots of great questions. I love it. And with that, we want to say again, thank you very much, Sherry, for speaking with us about your research in the PhytoRx work. And I want to thank all of y'all for watching. I want to remind you that we broadcast every 3rd Friday of the month at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. Next month's show will include an interview with my good friend, Dr. Russell Gorga from the Department of Textile Engineering, Chemistry, and Science. And he'll be discussing his work on nanofabrication. That's a lot different from what we were just talking about today, but all health related. You can find more information about the Wolfpack Wellness Research web series and our previous recordings on the Wolfpack Wellness website. Again, I'm your host, Dr. Susie Goodell, and until next time, be well.